Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Corinne Bush. I'm the Director of Nutrition Science and Education for the American Nutrition Association, and I'm so thrilled to be here today with Deanna Minich to talk to professionals from the perspective of personalized nutrition and its intersection with immune resilience. So you probably know, or many of you know, that we've been taking a really deep look at immune resilience and personalized nutrition at our resource hub, and that's located at the ANA.org on our website. And one of the true gems of this resource hub, there's so much information there, but a really true gem there is the Thought Leaders Conversation series that's been hosted over the past couple of months by Dr. Minich. And so what we aim to do today is mine that interview series for the pearls that came out of that. And really, I hope you watch all the interviews because they're truly fantastic, but we'll hit some of the high points today with Dr. Minich. And then we're going to turn the tables on our interviewer and interview Dr. Minich for her very unique perspective on personalized nutrition and immune resilience. So many of you know that Dr. Minich comes from a paradigm of food and spirit, so deep nutrition science, but connected to the self, nature, others, how all of that manifests. And that's really and truly a beautiful place to be coming from. So I can't wait to hear more about that. And then finally, we're going to lead you through a tool that we've developed that we hope that you will use with your own clients as you work with them on immune resilience and their attainment of immune resilience. Because we know we're all virtual now. And so we were thinking about, well, hey, what could we do for our professionals to help them to be in service to their clients at a time when things are much more difficult, people are, kind of in a state of alarm, and that alarm can translate to money problems. Many people are really thinking about that. And that came out throughout the interview series at times. So here's a template that you can use to move your clients through a session. And it could be a shorter session, and it doesn't have to be expensive, but we thought that's a way to really be in service to people at this time. So we're going to do that. And that'll be the wrap of the hour. So it's an exciting hour that we have planned, really looking forward to it. But let's start by introducing our interviewer of the Thought Leaders Conversation series, Dr. Deanna Minich. And I don't know that she needs much introduction to this group, but for those of you who don't know, Dr. Minich is a health educator, a researcher, an author with more than 20 years of experience in nutrition, mind-body health, medical science, and functional medicine. She's most recently been part of not one, but 3 task forces, and as a board member has been, as I said, interviewing a variety of experts to weigh in on immune resilience and personalized nutrition. Welcome, Dr. Minich.
Thank you, Corinne. It's really great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this synthesis, this summary of everything that we've done over these past months.
Yes. So I'd like to start with a place that you started with a lot of the folks that you interviewed and ask you what it's been like for you in your own life over these past months, because I know you and I know you're so used to your schedule of traveling and presenting your perspective on nutrition science across the world, really. And so I guess you're hunkered down, but you haven't seemed to have slowed down too much because you've really been out there a lot and really still in service to the ecosystem. So how's it been for you?
Yeah, thank you. I would say I have run the gamut of emotions. I've run the gamut of activities. One thing I have not really put any barrier to is my eating, however. I've always felt that nutrition, being in alignment with the food that I'm eating, will keep me as balanced as I possibly can be. So initially I had a lot of fear. A lot of my seminars were curtailed and ceased and not even rescheduled. So I had a lot of fear about, oh my gosh, what am I going to do as a professional? And then, yes, being engaged in all of these COVID-19 task forces and really bringing to light a better understanding of how nutrition interacts with the immune system. And I would say that for me professionally, that was one of the boons of all of this, that I had the opportunity to look into a deeper understanding of immunity and what we could be doing as part of our own internal imprint with nutrition. And I would say, you know, I'm not perfect. There are aspects of lifestyle medicine that I needed to cultivate better, one of which is physical activity. And I have had the opportunity, now that I'm not traveling, to take my daily walks, to really be in sync with my body even more than I would have been if I was constantly on the road. So I think that probably what many of us have experienced from this pandemic is that there is, of course, the suffering and the tragic aspects that we're seeing. And I've come to know a handful of people that have had COVID-19. And so seeing that side of it, of course, and then also looking in the middle, who is susceptible, and learning much more about that, the comorbidities of what I've been hearing, and I know we'll get into that. And then there's the other side of the spectrum in which I can see that there can be opportunities. There can be opportunities for all of us as individuals, as well as nutrition professionals. So what can we be doing to walk more of that talk? What can we be doing to empower more of our clients? I think that my mantra for this pandemic has been, I am open to possibilities. Because I feel like that's pretty much all we can do at this point, right? Is be as open and accepting and as receptive as we can. And to what you so eloquently said, how can we be of service?
And I was so taken by, we were having a conversation, maybe it was the end of a board meeting, I don't really recall, but how you said, hey, you know, I'm really open to doing interviews with experts. I know a lot of people, I have a lot of curiosity, and I know a lot about the immune system. So how about if we do this thing together? And so, you know, you speak about we're not perfect, but I think that ability to pivot from alarm and fear into what can I do that's going to serve the world and to really make a difference. And so that's been, I think that's so helpful for my own paradigm too, to help me make that shift from a fear-based narrative to really what we can do in the world at any time, no matter what we're faced with. So
and by the way, thank you for accepting that invitation to have because it incurs a lot of resources on the side of ANA. And so to be receptive to it is a whole other level of really being in that flow of service. So thank you to you, Corinne, and to the entire ANA for that.
Yes, we were thrilled to be in that with you, and still are, right? So what do you see now, Deanna, for the role of personalized nutrition and personalized nutrition practitioners during this time? How do you see that?
What I would say is this is our time. This is our time to shine. I get goosebumps in this moment because I'm seeing so many areas of opportunity for all of us. In fact, I was just sharing with you, Corinne, right before we got on live, one of the things that I do as a nutrition researcher is I'm in PubMed on a daily basis, and I'm doing the search terms COVID and nutrition to see what is coming out there. We have had a flurry of so many different scientific publications over these past months. So staying on the pulse of it, what are we seeing on vitamin D? What are we seeing on all of these different articles? In fact, there was just one that I just shared with you in the British Medical Journal, which Meredith also posted on our thread here. Wonderful article looking at all of the different nutrients. How do they play a role in the immune system? What are food sources? Us as nutrition professionals have the opportunity to educate, and not just educate. People are receptive now. So they are inspired and even perhaps much more motivated than they would have been otherwise. So when you ask me, what can we share at this time? What is important from a nutrition professional perspective is that this is the time to put our stake in the ground and to allow our practice to blossom. I have felt busier than ever, not just because I've been on 3 task forces, but because I've had a deluge of clients. I have not had this before, where the floodgates have opened and all of a sudden I'm seeing many more requests for consultations, especially I would say last month, not in March. March seemed to be that month of a lot of fear where we didn't know what was happening. And then once people came to grips with what their situation was and a little bit of outlook, I'm feeling like people are starting to accept this to a greater degree and starting to figure out what they can actually do. So this is our time to shine, for sure.
And what are we as personalized nutritionists? But we're experts in complex chronic disease. That's our thing. So when we think about the complexity and those foundational aspects that we're seeing during this pandemic and who's having those severe outcomes, we know that those that can understand that complexity and help people to shift into a better health all around is going to serve them best. So yeah,
we have a robust toolkit for sure. We could slice and dice our toolkit in many different ways to help people. And one of the basic things that we were seeing even on social media is, and I was posting on this too, is why are we seeing in the grocery store that the produce section is still very replete and populated, but then the processed food sections are devoid of products? We see barren shelves. So that's one point of learning. That's one point of entry into the conversation about food is medicine, food is connection, food is healing. Food is what we need during this time to support our immune system. So even just starting there with the basics.
For sure. Maybe you can talk a bit more right now about your paradigm of food and spirit. So when you just said about produce being, the produce is abundant, the processed foods are not there, I think about your focus on colorful phytonutrients and the roles that they play. And I was at the conference in November, the ANA conference, you spoke about a challenge that you give your clients, the 50 fruit and vegetable challenge. And that was an aha for me, really, Deanna, because I took that on when I got home. And so what this is Deanna asks her clients to eat 50 discrete fruits and vegetables in a month. And boy, it's not that easy because even if we eat lots of produce, we often have our favorites that we gravitate to. So can you talk more about that? Because I think that's a way to be a win-win for folks as they need to move away from processed foods. It's not, don't eat that, but hey, eat all of this. There's a world out there.
Oh, I really love it that you brought that up. And how interesting that you've actually done that.
Right.
I'm all about being practical. And what I love about the ANA is that we focus on personalized nutrition as our cornerstone. And I know that all of us can really see into that in the 21st century because we see that there are laboratory biomarkers, there are nutrition physical exam findings that we could adhere to. We have environments. So there's a strong case for personalization. I think that there's also a case for generalization. What are some things that everybody can do to clear some of the chronic inflammatory noise? So I like to focus on what are things that are artful, sustainable, and keep people curious. Because I know that when people get down the pathway of nutrition, oftentimes it can feel like there's so much analysis, there's so much number counting. And what I have seen, not just in clinical practice, but also in clinical trials, is that when you move people away from all of the numbers and you gamify it, you make it fun, you make it enjoyable, then people aren't thinking so much about the health aspects, they're focused on the happiness. And I do think that people move towards pleasure and away from pain. They're going to stay with the happiness of something. So you just keyed into one of the principles that I talk about within nutrition. I have 3. These are the common denominators. The first one is color, the second one is creativity, and the third one is variety. And I have practical tools for each of those. And what you just keyed into was the one on variety. So if we're talking about immune resilience, one of the things that I know and what our experts have told us, especially, we had a number of people who spoke to the gut microbiome. And what we know about the gut microbiome is that it likes diversity. Nature loves to bring in a whole multitude of different compounds in order to create this blend, this milieu, which brings us to prebiotics, really creating a gut terrain that is healthful and enables microorganisms to be brought in. That's where most of our immune system is. So when you spoke to the 50 food 7-day variety challenge, this is something that I actually got an idea from a scientific publication from a clinical researcher in the UK. So I want to give credit where credit is due to Miguel Toribio Mateus, who had published this 50 food 7-day list. And I took it and I changed it up a little bit. So I made different categories and columns for people to track. And the goal was to have 50 unique foods, plant-based foods. So this could be done by people following a ketogenic diet, a vegan diet. It really cut across all different dietary patterns. So just even aiming for biodiversity can create immune resilience. And in fact, that would be a wonderful tool to be bringing in now for our clients, is just to focus on rotation of foods. And when people don't know where to start, one of the things that I tell them is just go to the grocery store and buy one food that you haven't bought in a really long time. Like I just did that last week. I bought a bitter melon. I bought a bitter melon from my grocery store. I was thinking, okay, what haven't I had in a really long time? Bitter melon. So I bought one of those, and and I try to keep that in the back of my mind when I go to the grocery store. Even if I can't rotate every single thing, what is one thing that I can bring in that's a little bit varied and keeps me on my toes?
And I have to say, I've never tasted bitter melon. So is it
it's bitter.
Savory? Yeah, it's more of a savory fruit. Is it not? Or yeah, okay.
Yeah, it works well in soups and in stir fries. It is very bitter. And so I have been in the mode of making more soups lately. And so bitter melon fits very nicely into that.
I'll have to put that in my challenge for the week. That'll be everyone's. But what I'm thinking of as you're talking too is, what's come out of the research that we've seen over the past 8 or 10 or 12 weeks now on these phytonutrients, and whether it's, they're just this whole huge class of bioflavonoids, and whether it's quercetin or oleuropein or luteolin. And when you start to look at the foods that they're arrayed in, you see how much sense this mapping makes, And what I think you bring is the bridge between telling people, eat more fruits and vegetables, which it almost sounds too simplistic, I think, for that message to get through to people. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have, all the chemical names and what these chemicals do and the very deep science. But your approach is the bridge between the deep science and the very easy thing that can be done. So I think it's fantastic. And I'm sure that, it's a way to really impact people's behavior because it's doable. So
it is doable. Thank you for that. And saying eat the rainbow, it sounds so simple, but underneath that statement, there are so many studies, as Dr. Blumberg knows, and he's actually contributed many articles to that whole repertoire and that platform of what it means to eat the rainbow. In the 1990s, we focused on the antioxidant effects of these plants. And now I would say in the 21st century, we're looking at how do these plant compounds signal different messages to the cell, whether those are messages of resilience, of helping our cells to deal with stress, of helping protein kinases to communicate better for better signaling to the genome, of looking at anti-inflammatory effects, insulin sensitizing effects. So much of these plants, the beauty of plants is that they're pleiotropic, which means that they don't just do one thing. They're multitaskers. So they get into the cell and they start doing multiple things and modulating. So not turning on or off, but tweaking so that the cell can perform better. And this is really, again, I want to bring us all back as nutrition professionals to this concept of being in alignment with nature for better immune resilience. And one of the ways that we can do that is by bringing in more of these plant compounds.
Beautiful, beautifully said. I'm thinking back to the conversation you had, it was with Romilly Hodges and Kara Fitzgerald, where you brought up the concept of continuum of change. And I thought that was a really affirming and balancing concept. So can you talk a bit about that, how you see that idea of continuum of change?
In terms of our clients, right? In terms of meeting them where they're at.
Yes, meeting them where they are and intervening at any place that is, appropriate for where they're at.
Yeah, some of the people that I've learned from over the years, whether it's been Dr. Jeff Bland, it's been Barb Schultz, it's been Joe Lamb, it's been Michael Stone. I mean, I've had incredible teachers and mentors. And one of the things that I've learned from all of them is to listen, to really listen in a very conscientious way, right? And to really tap into what is a person telling you? What is a person showing you? What are they reflecting about their life's journey? And so I think that when I first started in nutrition, my dad was a police officer. And so I kind of had this police feel to nutrition. And so I kind of felt like do this, not that. And if you want to be healthy, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. To me, it was a very absolute science. And I felt like, hey, I can do this. Why can't you? So I had a very polarizing effect initially when I started my career. And then I realized that that doesn't really work for everybody. And then if I really wanted to affect people's lives and to be that placeholder there for them, if I wanted to hold space for them to have the change, I needed to be more receptive. And what I see happening with nutritionists so often is that they have so much information. They're exuberant about this information. They want to share it. They're bubbling over. They have so much to offer and so much to give. And so what I have learned is, how do we temper that information with meeting the client with where they're at? Because truly, most people know what they need to be eating for the most part. They know to avoid certain things. It's just that they're not sure how to get there. And so for us as nutrition professionals, one of the things that we need to bring even more into our toolkit is behavior modification. And so meeting them on that continuum of change, whether they're just starting out, where they put their toe in the water of that change, or they're ready to dive into the waters and they say, you know what, with this pandemic, I'm ready to do anything. And oftentimes that's where I start with somebody and I give them a scale. And I say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you want to dive in, 1 being you don't even want to put your toe in the water, where are you? And most people, they do not say 10. And if we tune into that and we say, oh, they just said 6, which means they're kind of ready, but they're kind of not. So how can I find something creative? And giving them the locus of control, really having them feed back to me what is the thing that they most want to do, because most times people know what they need to do. They really want somebody to be there to hold the space, give them support, give them further guidance.
Yeah, and I think you just pointed to something in the midst of the pandemic. I'm seeing people really coming in a state of readiness because they've struggled with the notion of, this could really happen to me and it could be ugly. And so I think that has moved people into more of a readiness state. Whether that will be, hold true after the pandemic is behind us is another thing. So I think you're right that we really need to understand that. And I agree, and I wonder about the audience if you want to tell us, but it does feel like we have this wealth of information and we're so eager to impart this to people, but often we don't take that first step, which is really to understand where they are in it. And that's just so important. So let's see, to shift gears a bit. Oh, I have a good one. So what would you say are some things that really stood out for you during the interview series or were aha moments for yourself? Can you share some of those experiences?
Well, it was such a gift to be able to interview all of these different experts because they were coming from so many different arenas. And so we had researchers, we had clinicians, we had people on the front lines. We had people who weren't as active and had this pause because of the pandemic. And so what did I find striking? Well, Michael Schneider was of great interest to me because he's really, I would say, he broke the ground of biohacking, at least in the academic setting. And so Meredith and I would laugh behind the scenes because Meredith would always give me questions before I'd go into these expert interviews, right? Which were all very good questions. But then I get in there and then I start asking because I'm just interested and I'm asking all the questions I want to know the answers to. And Michael Schneider had such an amazing gift of sharing with us how he biohacked and understood through all of these 7 devices he was wearing when he was starting to fall ill. And this was way before he was even diagnosed with Lyme disease. He had seen some changes in his pulse ox, in his heart rate, some of these basic things that even nutrition professionals can be tracking. Those are pretty agnostic markers, not to any particular medical discipline. That's something that we can all share in. So I think for me, it brought me back into something that Jeff Bland said years ago. And he said, if you can't measure it, you won't change it. And if we talk about behavior change, why is it that nutrition professionals have had diet diaries, food logs, because we want to see, we want to track. It's so important to have assessment tools, to have ways to assess somebody's condition from an objective numeric standpoint as much as subjective. So what Dr. Michael Schneider brought to the forefront for me was really a sense of how we can be using apps, how we can be wearing these different tools, whether it's on our wrist, on our finger. And one of the things that inspires me, physical activity is the thing that I fall short on. And so monitoring my steps, having a number keeps me going. And it brought me back to that.
It keeps me going too, and I don't know if anyone has seen, David Sedaris has an absolutely hilarious essay on the Fitbit. If anyone hasn't seen it, I would look that up. But yeah, I too enjoyed his very much. I think an aha for me was Stephen Sinatra's talk, an interview with you, which was fantastic. If you folks have not seen it, I would go right to that one. But he talked about crying and how it rids ourselves of cortisol and inflammatory cytokines in tears. And that, as a crier, you said you're a crier, me too. And you always look at it as like, oh, it's a shameful thing, I should hide my tears. But now, that gave me a different paradigm to look at crying from. So that was really amazing.
I agree with you, Corinne. Dr. Sinatra's interview was beautiful because I've always found that the cardiologists seem to be integrated into more than just the physical body. They look at the emotional self. And when you were asking about food and spirit, it's about how do we integrate all parts of us, right? Not just the physical body aspects of nutrition, but what about our emotional relationship to food? What about cravings during this time of the pandemic? So Dr. Sinatra very elegantly talked about our connection to stress. He talked about grounding, being a connection with the earth, being outside. And I love what he said about the tears, because I was aware of that research about how we produce something on the order of 25 different chemokines and cytokines within our lacrimal fluid, so our tears, and that changes depending on our health state. So it's really, to think of how we really need to be on the pulse of our stress level, our emotional state, because we do see a connection between our immune system health and how we feel emotionally. And in fact, Dr. Sinatra and I were talking about social isolation. We talked about grief. Grief is a big one, especially during this time of loss, where people are having family members suffer and even dying. I happen to have had somebody close to me die during this time, not of COVID-19, but of other comorbidities. And so, how do we deal with grief? And how do we bring that more into the open? I think that as nutrition professionals, bringing in the emotional health into the physical side makes for a much more integrated whole.
So true. Yes. So speaking of comorbidities, that came up in a number of people's interviews. I'm thinking of, I believe it was Chris Mason and Rob Beardall. Both spoke to, and others did too, but that stands out for me, on those comorbidities, obesity being so high up there in terms of where that lands in severe outcomes, and of course insulin dysregulation and other comorbidities. And so what can we be doing right now to prepare ourselves to, to really, if we meet this disease, to really have a good outcome rather than a severe outcome? Because, and the other thing that comes up for me with that is, without shaming people, right? When people that are obese come to see us, we know that's not going to turn around in 1 month or 2 months completely, or 3 months. But that insulin regulation is something that can turn around very quickly. So how do we do that type of counseling?
That's very well said, Corinne, and you're right that it's a tender balance of how do you make somebody not stressed and feel shame, because that's going to lead to different emotional states that won't be productive towards them making a change in their health. So most of the nutrition professionals out there know the power of one meal. And in fact, I often like to present, when I am giving seminars, I talk about the acute meal effects. And there's one study I always go back to. It was one study in which they fed people a variety of different meals that were essentially brown, yellow, and white. Lots of fat, lots of processed foods, milkshake, lots of bread, refined products. And what they did was they measured their markers of inflammation. And in particular, they looked at IL-6, interleukin-6, which is an inflammatory cytokine, after the meal. And what they showed was that by the 6th hour postprandially, that there was almost a 100% increase in IL-6. So there was inflammation just right there within hours of having a meal. It's not something we have to wait a lifetime for. So what that tells me is that how do we reverse engineer that? How do we empower our clients to know that their locus of control can come with the next meal? They don't have to wait over and over. I think so many people get focused on weight gain and weight loss. And truly, I think that target is probably not the best target. I would say that the best target is moving towards metabolic health, what you just spoke to. So insulin, glucose, cortisol, there's this triangle that we have. So managing our stress through cortisol, managing our glucose and insulin through the next meal, making sure that we have enough fiber. So it's not only, I think for many people, they get scared with nutrition because they think of all of the do not haves. I mean, I even grew up with a mother who was a do not have kind of person. It was, don't have that white bread. The whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead. There was a lot of fear around food. And so I would say that how can we focus on what can you have? How can we populate with more fiber, with more colorful foods, make it engaging, and not have that connected to numbers? You know, I've been a part of a variety of clinical studies in which we simply gave people a list of foods to have, and we said, have as much as you want, and they would lose weight because they were eating foods that were whole, unprocessed. They were creating metabolic health in their bodies so that their bodies eventually would start to shift into place through what was right for them.
I think that metabolic shift concept is right on target. And that one meal concept it's so awesome because we don't need to wait even to see changes in insulin sensitivity, which do happen quickly, but to focus on the meal. I think that's an awesome concept. So I think that we should probably now segue to our next part of our conversation, even though I could listen to this interview or be engaged in this interview for forever. But what I'd like to also say is that as we segue, why don't you put your questions into the Q&A area, and we'll leave a little time at the end of each segment to address questions, and then we'll take questions at the end that we have not gotten to.
Okay. Should I advance to the next slide
Yes,
here? Okay.
Please do. Yeah.
Here we are.
Okay, so maybe I'll frame this just a little bit for the group, Deanna. So what we're going to be talking about next is this mini consult that you can do with your clients to kind of frame immune resilience for them. But first we have to frame it for ourselves, right? So this is what we would be thinking about as we work through a session with our clients. These are the top factors that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, so did you want to go through these step by step?
Sure. Do you want me to do that, or do you want to do that?
Well, why don't you start, and I can chime in as we go.
All right. So what really, comes to me here, which is really on that concept of the continuum, because what I think is a really nice approach with a client is to understand where the gold is with that person. And so maybe the gold for that person is to start by addressing their insulin sensitivity, because that's where they have the most dysfunction and imbalance. But as we address insulin sensitivity with the many things that we can do to enhance healthy insulin sensitivity, you just spoke to some of them, right? So plant fibers, especially soluble fiber, and adding healthy fats, and looking at vitamin D status and many of the different facets of insulin sensitivity. As we do that, we begin to balance those other systems, don't we? Because inflammation levels come down, and those plant fibers, the soluble fibers, will build short chain fatty acids in the microbiome. So there's just a beautiful interplay of all of these systems and factors that come to bear when we start to work with a client.
Yeah, and I might chime in that where I see the biggest ripple through effect is by focusing on inflammation, especially for the immune system, because those two things go hand in hand. So if there's a lot of inflammation in the body, redness, pain, heat, swelling, fatigue, what can happen is that the immune system isn't working as well, right? Those things go hand in hand. And then if there's an immune response, then typically inflammation goes higher. So I always like to get the heat of the body just right, metaphorically speaking. And so we can do that with dietary measures. I think about even how we cook food. How we cook food can lead to more inflammatory components, otherwise known as advanced glycation end products, that can upregulate inflammation just by, not even by what we just ate as the food, but how we cooked that food. And so I don't often have to have a client change their eating. I just need to have them change the cooking. So if I can reduce their inflammation meter inside, then their immune system will work better. But if they stay constantly inflamed, and in fact, there was a study, and I think it came out in 2018 or 2019 in PLOS One, showing that heightened inflammation leads to greater impulsivity. So if we have an inflamed person, and most people do have some degree of inflammation, it's really the bedrock of so many chronic diseases, they're going to be more impulsive potentially, which means that they may not be in a conscientious mindset to be making the best decision for themselves. So how do we reduce the inflammation meter? We bring that down so that you clear the noise, and then they can make sense of it. They feel more in control of their surroundings. And then insulin works better. The gut microbiome becomes better populated. Their stress level is better. Nutrients are in full supply rather than in depleted supply. So I think there are so many different portals, Corinne, that nutritionists could take. You know, some of the nutrition professionals out there love the gut. They're all about gut healing. They want to portal through to the immune system through the gut. And you can do that too. I think that there are many paths into creating this immune resilience, and they're all very interconnected.
And I remember back to the interview with David Perlmutter when he spoke to just that issue that you brought up in terms of inflammation translating to impulsivity. And so we think about then the crosstalk, right, between the stress response and inflammation, and how in this time that people are being more impulsive, how does that then, impact their immune systems? So
absolutely.
Very well said. So do we have any questions specific to this point? We really don't. We have some that we'll address, I think, later. So questions about your resource for 50 foods in 7 days and other things, but we will send those out afterwards. So if I don't see any questions specific to this, I think we can move on. This is how the nutritionist would frame their own mindset going into their session with a client.
Okay.
And then assessment. So, it all really starts with that conversation, doesn't it? And so much of it, I think, is about assessing readiness of that person. And we are seeing more and more, I think, or in my own experience, and I've heard this from others too, anecdotally, is that people really are coming to us saying, what can I do now? And so that is, a really interesting place to be, because often that's not the case. But so we need to really then bring in a very rich understanding and listening to that person as we kind of mine for who they are and what they're about, by getting a really good history and leading them through the conversation to make that happen. And maybe Deanna, you could speak to your approach to this.
Yeah, a good history taking involves, again, the capacity to listen. And so there are many ways to do this as a nutrition professional, depending on what you prefer. I know that within functional medicine, we talk about a timeline, which is always a nice way to look at the epigenetic effects of food. So what was happening when your mother was pregnant with you? What was she eating, if you could get to that level of detail? Or you can bring it into present day. One of the things, back to Michael Schneider and kind of this whole world of tech and what we're seeing happening is, how can we use even photographs of food so that we can get a sense? I remember I had somebody I was working with some years ago, and she was telling me about all these salads that she was having. And I was thinking, oh, that sounds good, but why is she still not healthy? There's something off. So I asked her to take a picture of her salad. And then when she sent it to me, I could see that it was iceberg lettuce. I could see that there was lots of dressing. I could see that there were a couple of cherry tomatoes, but it was not the kind of salad that I was thinking of, right? And so there are so many new technologies coming out on this front. So I think getting a window into their health history through their story, letting them tell you their story, telling their story back to them, the parts that are relevant, and then really looking at how does food and eating come in? Oftentimes I'll have an audience define what is food for you? Like, just shout it out. Is food energy? Is food connection and family? Food, I think of my dad, food is love. His mother would make all these baked products. And so even now, she's gone, she's passed on, but he continues to make breads and baked products. And we say, Dad, we can't eat all that stuff. And he's like, yes, but this is my way of showing love. So we need to understand the motivation for why people eat, why they choose the foods they do. And I think if we do that, then we have greater context to work from.
Definitely. And I think today, more than ever, during this time, really digging for lifestyle and finding out where people are at, right? So how are they sleeping? Are they being more active, or are they really just moving to the couch because of their state of mind? Are they out of work? Are they under stress with children at home and still working from home? So I think that's a really big one right now to understand people's lifestyle issues.
That is a big one. And I think if we could track, there are many different tools that nutrition professionals can use. And one of the ones that I like to use is where you have a snapshot of a day and you can see what people are eating and how they are living. And you can start to make connections. People start to see that, oh, wow, when I got stressed homeschooling the kids, I was eating more chocolate. Whereas if they weren't tracking and logging and being aware of it because they're just in the throes of it, they don't see that there's a pattern. So, and sometimes, I see it like a spider's web. I will often ask somebody, and this just happened. I had a client last week and I asked, which aspect would you like to work with? Like, where do you have most passion? For some people, they don't even want to touch sleep because they kind of have their set rhythm. But just finding out where they want to work from can create that sense of the ripple through. And stress is not easy. For that, I like what we were talking about with heart rate variability. I talked about that with Dr. Sinatra a little bit. So heart rate variability, HRV, is a measure of autonomic nervous system function. So if we're overly stressed, that will be reflected in the beat-to-beat variations in the heart rate. And so bringing that as a tool into one's eating experience, into one's sleeping experience, or even into physical activity could actually be very eye-opening for people.
Can you give our audience an idea of where they would reach out for heart rate variability? Is it easy enough to just Google and find out how one can measure that?
There's a good website. It's HeartMath, MATH.org. HeartMath.org has been in the field for a very long time, looking into a variety of different biofeedback tools in order to enable an assessment of heart rate. You can also get apps on this now that are free, where you just put your finger up to the light, to the camera, and it can essentially create the heart rate pattern. And then there's an algorithm built into the app that will give the HRV, the heart rate variability assessment. So there are these tools available that don't even incur a cost.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. I see that Meredith just put that into the chat.
Perfect.
And so to move on a bit, one thing we were thinking about is people are coming to us these days. Often they don't have labs. And as personalized nutritionists, where some of us are doing really pretty esoteric lab testing, we're looking deeply at nutrient status and really status across the many different aspects. But we don't have that information. We might have historical information though. So what we have here are 5 simple biomarkers, lab markers, that if we can dig back into that person's historical record that we have on them, we can understand what their inflammatory status is and their nutrient status vis-a-vis vitamin D, fasting insulin, and hemoglobin A1C. And we did have a question about, well, why no fasting glucose? Then you could measure HOMA-IR. And that's so true. We could have easily put that there because so many more people have fasting glucose levels than fasting insulin. So that's definitely a really good, thank you, Karen. that was good coaching to add that to the tool.
The only thing about fasting blood sugar, which people have more access to, it still doesn't give us the general sense of how hard the body is working to keep that within normal constraints, right? Which is why so many practitioners like to have fasting insulin as well, because you could be seeing normal or relatively normal glucose levels, but at what cost? So I think, yes, HOMA is good because it incorporates glucose and insulin as an algorithm to give a sense of how in balance those two things are together. So that is a good point.
Yes. So let's see what questions we have here. A link for the free app. Why don't we, Meredith and I will follow up on some of these questions after the webinar. So I think we can move on.
Okay. I like this one, Corinne. I like all these different icons, and it's almost like a menu of all the things that we can do in order to support our immune system. And the one that I'm always drawn to, and I feel like it's the lost leader in nutrition, is going after herbs and spices, going after them. And I've been doing this more and more, just even in my own protocol. You know, it's been estimated that Americans have like a repertoire of spices that they use, and typically it's black pepper and cinnamon. those are like our favorite spices, right? And but you know, I have since this whole pandemic, when I have time now to really cook and get into it, my husband is loving this because it's like I'm making all of our meals and I'm enjoying it. I have gone into my spice cabinet, and when I think about medicine cabinets for nutritionists, here are the few that I think of. I think of the obvious one in our bathroom with essential oils and perhaps some medicinals for the skin. I think about our refrigerator, which is truly a medicine cabinet. I think about our supplement cabinet, which I'm sure many of us have a dietary supplement. I have a huge one. And then I think of our spice cabinet, wherever we're keeping, even if it's on the countertop and it's a little rotating spice wheel of some type, this is a medicine cabinet. And it's one of the best things for our immune system. It gives us phytonutrient diversity and density. It gives us the complexity that we need from plants. Many of them are anti-inflammatory. They're insulin sensitizing. They're working on all the pathways that we're talking about as it relates to immune resilience. So what I would say is use this as an opportunity to dive into all of those different spices. And we often hear about turmeric, but don't forget that, as you know, Corinne, I mean, you have an Italian background. So, I mean, you're used to many of these like oregano and rosemary. And every ethnic group kind of has like their own repertoire of spices. I think of the Middle Eastern spices that I'm very drawn to. You know, very different in taste profile than the East Indian spices. So, but they're all protective. They're all incredible. And you don't need so much. I mean, this is almost like a dietary supplement. And so bringing those in, we can be helping our clients with simple things about the spices. I remember I did a webinar some time ago on the 5 spices to have in your spice cabinet. Very simple ones like the rosemary, ginger, turmeric, cinnamon, and I talked about the different mechanisms of these. So maybe just even for our nutrition professionals to do a little video on their spice rack at home. You know, what about expiration dates on those things, that they lose their medicinal value over time, so we have to keep them fresh, much like everything else. So anyway, I just had to jump in on that one because, my goodness, that's an opportunity right there. That is a medicine cabinet within our kitchen.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good entree time for us now. I too, I mean, I always cook, and my husband, Robert, also, but now that we are home together more, we've really been digging into our bulk spices, and there's so many recipes coming out. The New York Times is doing inserts on that and many other publications online. And so it's really been fun to mix it up and use some spices that not have been traditionally in our repertoire. But then I wanted to focus on protein a little bit, because this came up in your conversation with Victoria Bem and Selena Ahmed, and how we really could be delving into those alternative protein sources that are also so rich in B vitamins and soluble fiber. And so if we think about beans and legumes and really moving our clients into those sources, that, you know, especially now where meat is in very short supply.
Yes, and in fact, in process right now, I'm working with a CNS, and we're putting together a manuscript on how can you eat healthy and good quality foods with a low budget. And so, yes, we think of protein. Protein provides the building blocks of the immune system, but it's also very expensive. So even when the pandemic and lockdown and quarantine started to happen, I had to think for myself, I better start pulling out my beans, my dry beans and my legumes that I don't typically take the time to soak and cook up. But if you look at it from a cost perspective, there surely is a cost savings by bringing those things out. And then I was thinking for myself, some of the things that I hear as pushbacks from clients is, but I don't digest beans and legumes well. I have an autoimmune condition, so I avoid those things. And there's a little bit of myself in that as well. If I'm not careful, if I'm not watching my digestion, I can experience some digestive unrest from these things. So if we have the time to soak these different legumes 6 to 8 hours, rinse them well, cook them well, then we inactivate a lot of the, whether it's fibers or lectins or various other compounds that cause this maldigestion, that can cause bloating. And so sometimes, if we are not bringing in these foods, we lose the enzymes that break down those foods. We're not as robust in their production. So when we slowly bring them back in, the body starts to produce those enzymes again. We get our gut healed. And many times I think that when people experience issues from legumes that are related to bloating or digestion, it's a call to action to really, again, focus on digestive health.
Yes. And really, once you soak a pot of beans, you pointed to the fact that I'm Italian, which I am, so I've been eating beans and greens since I'm a little kid. But once you do that, and it's just such a revelation compared to what comes out of the can, it's really easy, as you say, you soak it overnight and then cook them in the morning, drain them and start with new water, so you're draining off some of those problematic components for people. So, yeah.
Corinne, can I mention something? Just I know that the nutrition professionals out there are aware of this, but what I'm really liking are all of the legume-based pastas. So what I'm seeing is, like, I have a chickpea pasta. I have an edamame mung bean type of fettuccine noodle that is 24 grams of protein in one serving. It's unbelievable.
How does it taste?
It tastes great. You would think that, when I think of rice pasta, there's a certain texture to it, but a lot of these different legume-based pastas are actually, they have a better structure. It holds together better, I think, because of the higher protein content. Wow. And they're not that expensive. They are pretty much in line with some of the other pastas that are gluten-free. And so it's a great alternative, and I'm sure that many of you have looked into that who are listening. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I just purchased a red lentil pasta, but did not. I haven't tried it yet. It hasn't come yet. So we have from Gabrielle asking, what about? I think this is a great idea, Gabrielle. What about supplementation of digestive enzymes with legumes and beans? And I think, Deanna, you pointed to, if we go slowly and let our own digestive tracts get used to that again, then we might not need the digestive enzymes, but then again, we might. So I think that's really good. Good coaching, Gabrielle. And then from Jill, wants to know, Deanna, with your increase of interested clients, what are your steps in determining who will be successful from those who will just be impulsive in their desire to become more healthy? Can you weed those out? I think that's what Jill is asking us.
That's a good question. Well, I think it gets back to my intake form in which I'm asking them why they're seeking a consult. I want to know the why. And I also let them know from the get-go. In fact, this just happened recently where I was approached by a whole family. So the mother of the family contacted me, and it was great. And I let her know, and I said, I can work with your whole family, but if somebody isn't motivated, that's really my preference, is to work with people who are motivated. So I just let them know before we've even entered the consultation phase, hey, I work with very motivated people. I'm here to help you, to guide you, to be there for you. I'm there 100%, and I want you to be there with me and sharing in that dynamic. So I let her know that, and not everybody contacted me because I think, that's my way. But for some of you who have a much more expansive continuum of the different types of people you see, you might be open to that. So you need to ask those questions. How motivated are you? On a scale of 1 to 10, incorporate that into your history form so that you get a sense and you can already get a gauge of where they are and where you need to start.
Yeah, and
just be upfront.
Right. Yeah. And many of us, not all of us, of course, but many advanced personalized nutritionists are very expert in behavior modification and behavioral understanding. So I think there's a range of how that plays out within our community. But certainly, as you pointed to earlier, that's something that we really need to understand more about and how to put that into practice.
So Corinne, maybe that's a module for the ANA educational platform. We've got so many different great nutrition modules, and then now bringing in some of the behavior mod to help people to navigate and do things like interview style type of motivation, right? And so asking them, having more open-ended questions versus the fire hose of information that all of us are really used to doing, because it's just, we're so excited about what we know.
Yes. We're getting a question. This is probably our final question. We're coming up to the end of the hour, but it's on the brand of legume pastas. The one that I know is Explore Asian. I don't know if that's the one you were talking about, Deanna. It's an organic brand that has mung bean and black bean pastas. Is that the one?
That's the one. There are some others, however. That's the edamame mung bean pasta that I'm thinking of, but there are others like the chickpea one. I don't know the brand off the top of my head. I can get that to Meredith and we can post it on the thread. But there are a number of them now. And I mean, even places like Trader Joe's, there are very low budget alternate type pastas that are not highly processed and provoking the glycemic response like, a refined grain pasta would be.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's exciting. I'm glad. See, there's a consumer need, and that's what we need to continue to have our clients do, is to communicate with the food manufacturer, communicate with the grocery store, and tell them that we want these kinds of products.
Mm-hmm. And Holly just let us know that Asian Cuisine is the new name of this company, I guess the one I pointed to. So this was a great segment. Let's advance the slide. I think that's the last slide that we have.
Okay.
And we'll go to finding out about our conference for this year coming up in November.
Okay, we did have this one.
Virtual practice. Oh my goodness. Well, the whole concept of this last piece was about virtual practice. But I would like to let our folks know that we do have a resource on our resource hub, our microsite, that really speaks to these changes to the HIPAA regulations, and there's lots of information there. So Brittany, our Director of Advocacy, has really gone state by state to look at the laws in the state. Now you're doing telehealth, but you have to be thinking about the state to whom the person is residing in. So there's a really nice list that you can go to for. There have also been changes not only to HIPAA regulations, but Medicare. So Medicare has made it, they've kind of collapsed if you wanted to become a Medicare provider, the timeline of that is much shortened. So there's ability there. Also, you can do Medicare counseling by telehealth without that rural restriction that is typically in play.
You know who gave a very nice summary of this, Corinne, was Jacqueline Chassie, who is an ND who works with Emerson Ecologics, and that was one of the more recent interviews that I did. It was phenomenal. I got so much good feedback on that behind the scenes. So if you are wanting some more pearls on what you can do with your virtual practice, she was giving all kinds of ideas, free things that you can do, but then also paid fee for service type of ideas. I would say to go back to that interview on the ana.org page and just see what Jacqueline had to say. It was a really excellent interview.
Yes, and I think this last bullet I pulled directly from Jacqueline in your interview on reaching out to your clients with a message of service, whatever that is, and letting them know that you're there. And that is such a powerful thing for folks to understand that. And then really, then people do want to be counseled. They want our counsel as a result, but we're doing it from a place of service, which is beautiful. Yes,
it was great. It was very inspiring. Yeah.
Okay, so now we'll almost end by asking you to save the date for our Personalized Nutrition 2020 conference. It's going to be fantastic. Meredith has been deep into training on virtual platforms, and she's been showing me just some really amazing things that folks are doing with virtual conferences. So November 12th and 13th, we're going to have a focus on the science of immune resilience and personalized nutrition, and then in the afternoon, the practice of personalized nutrition and immune resilience. And Dr. Deanna Minich will be one of our featured speakers in that afternoon session. So we're thrilled about that. And now before we close, may I bring on our nutrition science team. I'd like to introduce everyone to two women without whose help and work we just could not be coming through with our mission to be the professional home for the science and practice of personalized nutrition. So we have under me, if we're looking at it, the tech host. She's listed as the tech host, and here she is. That's Meredith Toohey. Over and over throughout the course of this with Deanna. And, you know, Deanna, you described Meredith as impeccable, and I think that's a really good word for the way Meredith handles the production, not only of this interview series, but really the production of everything that we do. So Meredith is our nutrition education manager, excuse me. And so she does all of the production of our conferences from soup to nuts. Conferences, our webinars, all of our trainings all go through Meredith because she is impeccable. So thank you, Meredith, for bringing this to bear the way that you have. It's been a pleasure. And it's a pleasure for me to be part of the nutrition science team with you. And now Victoria Bem. Victoria, we're going to see you. There you are.
Hey.
Yeah. So Victoria is our manager of nutrition science, and you were all lucky enough to hear her interview, I hope, with Deanna. That was, I think, just last week. So if you haven't heard it, I urge you to listen to that interview or watch that interview, because it's a real look at family nutrition and how we feed families in this time, and how not only in this time, but how we can feed families most productively and healthfully overall. And so again, we could not have done this series, but really we couldn't do the work of the ANA without these two women who really are the backbone of our nutrition science. So,
I'm wondering, Meredith, do you feel comfortable sharing about your son? And he started eating the rainbow during this time.
He did, yes. So I've been using, Dr. Minich, your beautiful rainbow handout, and it's been so fun. He's such a picky eater, and we tried so hard to have him try different foods and whatnot, but he wasn't getting engaged in the process and wasn't excited about it. So using your rainbow chart to really empower him to, if he ate something that was a certain color, then he would get excited and cross it off in a really messy way on the chart. So that's been a lot of fun. We've been really working hard on that with him.
All right. I'm going to try that with my grandchildren. That's fantastic.
We need to, and I think for all of the nutritionists out there, what can we do for families? Because once we start to change the family, we start to change generations. So that's why I was really just thinking about Meredith's son and, how do we really help kids during this time? Many of us are at home. I know Victoria's at home. She's got kids as well. Her parents are there. I mean, you've got a whole web. It's like, how can we create this with the whole family, a family package for nutrition? How can we be doing this? Just have everybody on Zoom, go into their kitchen with them on Zoom. Think that there are so many fun. I used to do that before I really got into the one-on-one. I would go to people's homes and I would look at their kitchen. I'd look at their refrigerators as a family. So maybe this is a time that we hearken back to family health and what we could do with food too.
Beautiful. So, and I don't think we can close without really giving deep gratitude and thanks to you, Deanna, for not only this interview series, but all that you mean to the ANA, because you have, I think at one point during the series, you said your mantra during this time is open to possibility, but I see that as, that's who you are all the time. And so many of you know that Deanna serves on our boards. She's really an important thought leader for the work that we do. And so thank you very much. Very grateful.
Thank you, Corinne. It's really a delight. It's a pleasure to be part of the ANA, and I want more people to know about the ANA. I really do. I feel like there's so many opportunities that people are unaware of through the ANA. So if you haven't looked at the website, just please, because we're a global community. This is how we connect and how we get the word out on nutrition. So thank you for having me to do this.
Yes. Well, thanks to all. Stay safe, and the website is theana.org. So please visit us there and join the ANA. We want you as part of our family.
Absolutely.